Welcome back. So today I'm going to walk through the last three change leader competencies: making sound decisions, nurturing lasting relationships, and communicating to inspire. So I'm excited to share this with you today. So let's go ahead and dig right in. In my workshop on business transformation, I talk a lot about the first pillar of power. And change does not happen without power, specifically willpower. Power is needed to make things happen. And if you don't have the people in power in your organization believing in your change, it's not actually impossible. However, it's going to take a lot longer. For change to occur, you need power from your leaders. CEOs and executives have to sign off on the budget. We need to purchase certain tools for change to occur. Legislatures have to sign off on laws and pass laws for change to occur. And then what about permanence? How do you ensure that change will last? In opposite to power, edicts or mandates from the top do not produce lasting change very often. Maybe temporarily, but if that power shifts or if it is eliminated, then likely people will go back to the old way of doing something. And that's why it's necessary to have permanence, that grassroots support, that deep buy-in, that people who are going to be affected have to believe in the change that's taking place. Without that, whatever change you're going to put in place, it's not going to be adopted very well, and it may not be used at all. So regardless of power, if people do not buy into the change, then they're not going to use your new service or your new product. And then there's no permanent change, and change is either slow or possibly fails altogether. So here's a good graphic to look at, is that to balance power and permanence for your decision strategy, power defines the outcome, resources, and the timeline. And then permanence are the details and the operations. And there's a way that I maximize permanence through a freedom of choice analogy or story that I frequently use that came from a really good friend of mine and colleague from a long time ago. In thinking through this, it'll allow you to maximize the freedom of choice wherever possible among your constituents. And this can build trust, increase credibility and flexibility with team members and stakeholders that are the recipients of the particular change. So yes, you'll have decisions, key decisions that are made from the top down, but then the grassroots support, the buy-in will come from the majority of the people. And in terms of how to decipher what decisions the masses can make, your team members or your constituents, this is a really effective way of thinking through something in order to decipher how or who could make those decisions. And I always look at it as at a pebble. I always ask, is it a pebble, a rock, or a boulder? And also, this is a great technique that works wonders with your kids to decide, are you going to let your kid make that decision, or if it's going to be one that you as the parent are going to make. So if a particular outcome of a decision, the impact, the risk is small or minimal, even if you disagree with it, the pebble-sized decision is clearly one that you can give freedom of choice to the other person. And if they get hit by that pebble, it may cause them pain, but in the long run, they're going to learn from that, and that's a much better outcome for them. And maybe you want to advise against it, but certainly it's a risk that if the outcome goes poorly, the person's going to bounce back and they're going to learn from it. And then the second layer is it a rock? Is the decision being contemplated the size of a rock? Now, if a person makes a bad decision and they get hit by a rock, that's not going to feel so good. They're not going to be happy, but you know the outcome of this decision, but they may not. And so you need to educate them on the risks and the potential impact of them making that decision. That is your job as the change leader. You have to educate them, even if they don't want to hear it. They have to know what the consequences of that decision are and help them to advise an appropriate course of action. However, in all said and done, it may be that the freedom of choice still rests with that individual to make that decision in order to carry out the best learning and the best freedom of choice. So you as the change leader are responsible for making sure they're making an educated decision. And then secondly, you might want a backup plan. If you know that this is a decision others have made before and you know what the outcome likely will be, what are you going to do? How are you going to help that person if they do indeed? If the rock breaks an arm, theoretically, of course, how are we going to help? And then a boulder is a decision that is so risky and so large that you are not allowing a new or an unqualified person to make. It's a safety question, a high risk question, or big impact to the business. If a person or that business gets hit by a boulder, they're going to go off the cliff. And you as the change leader, you cannot allow that to happen. So you as a leader retain freedom of choice in those decisions. And I have found that this paradigm is a really good one to educate on at the very beginning of a project so that they know what the parameters are, the layers, the pebble, the rock, the boulder. And then if you do run across a decision that is a really, really big one in the midst of the project and you're going to say, this is a boulder, so the freedom of choice is going to be with those executives or with you as the change leader, then there's less resistance as they know that it's coming. So I've got some implementation tips for you for arriving at sound decisions. And while it may be not so obvious, recognize the importance of making a decision. Many times it's better to make a decision and get moving on a pathway than to not make a decision at all. No decision means that people will stop and you'll lose momentum. And even if you don't believe the decision is 100% right, if it's mostly right, that 80-20 rule, it's good to just keep going and make a decision, and you can always tweak and course correct as you go along. As a leader, you're going to need to work to put a stop on analysis paralysis of people trying to find that perfect solution. And there's a quote from George Patton that I use as a good plan, violently executed, is better than a perfect plan executed next week. So then it's the emphasis of that momentum and building and moving as you go to maintain your group speed and your daily work. Next, realize that as a change leader, you don't have to know everything. And what a relief that is. Who can? Instead, you want to assess the gaps in your knowledge or perhaps the gaps of knowledge within your teams and then fill those in with the right people. Who are the experts within your organization or outside of your organization who can help you arrive at really key decisions that are important to make? And from operations perspective, it's way better for your frontline experts in your organization to provide that guidance because they are the people who know the workflow, they know the organization best, and they're the people who are going to be using the change on a day-to-day basis. Another tip is to always ask questions and to remain curious. You want to ask critical questions of your team and get them to think of new options. What have they seen work in other situations? What have they seen work in other places? And you want to make sure people are not just recreating the past, that you want them to bust out of their patterns, get out of their old habits, and get into new ways of thinking and doing. And pattern busting is really critical by asking the right questions and helping them to think creatively and not just pave the past with their old habits. So keep asking questions. Ultimately, you'll get a gut feeling of when you've arrived at something that's right. And lastly, you want to make sure, as I say over and over again, to document your decision making. You want to look at the root cause, document the causes, document those symptoms. What are the options? What options are taken? The benefits. And then I always include who was involved in making the decision, because weeks, months down the road, you're going to forget. And if you have that historical record of who was involved, it can really help make sure that you don't have to recreate the wheel if you have to come back to it later. Okay, so the next core competency I'm going to talk about is nurturing lasting relationships. And this involves active listening, compassion, and advocacy. So to nurture lasting relationships, why is this important? In change, the work itself is hard, and sometimes it's really hard and it can take a long time. And change takes heart and a lot of it. Otherwise, people aren't going to want to work with you if you don't demonstrate that understanding and that empathy and compassion with them. And I've always felt that project management by itself is not too hard. It's the tasks, the dates, the scopes, the budgets. But it's the human elements of change that are hard. It's the emotional aspects of it. It's the belief systems around change that are hard. And that is where, if you can simplify it and help lead by example, then you're going to be able to really demonstrate for your team, for your group. And in working with that group, you're going to be able to challenge and get greater things accomplished. This is one of my favorite all-time quotes by Theodore Roosevelt, and I frequently have to remind myself of this, is that people do not care what you know until they know you care. And by demonstrating that you care, you're building on your credibility and you're establishing trust with your community, with your team members, so that they are going to be with you as you continue to work through that change. Good change agents are also good listeners. They're more perceptive and able to pick things up, especially problems, early, often when they are small. And it's that level 3, the smelling smoke, that I talked about earlier about. Listening well helps forge stronger relationships for the long haul. Because as you're able to accomplish something and then build on that relationship to the next level, that's how you attain long-lasting change and long-lasting success in your career. So listening really, really helps develop those permanent relationships or long-term relationships. And what people want to know is that you have their best interest at heart. That's that caring quote we just talked about. And when you get to know them and know what their problems are, you understand what their needs are, you're listening to them and understanding where they come from before you implement change solutions. And as you build that rapport with them, the solutions that you develop together are the ones that are going to be more likely to be on point and be effective. So change is hard, and making sure that people can rely on you for your guidance and support, that you're in it for the long haul, is going to be key to your success. In addition to active listening is thoroughly understanding the problem, and often I take notes. I carry a notebook with me, even to lunch or to dinner, and I always want to make sure that I don't forget to write down a key problem that a customer may identify that I can help out with. So it's not necessary even to respond on the spot, but if they're giving criticism, it's better to resist that urge and instead just listen to them and take those notes so that you can reflect and find the nugget of truth or come back to it later with a solution that is possible. And then also related to listening is to listening on multiple levels. A good listener is not just listening to the words, but also listening to the emotions that are being conveyed. And this can take a lot of practice, but certainly doable. And it's something that you think about when you're talking is, why is this person feeling this way? And what is this person expressing that their needs are, their problems are at this time? And while it may take you some time to figure out, instead of getting an immediate response in the moment, you just want to listen and help to take some good notes, and listening on those multiple levels will help you to do that. Active listening is a sign of high emotional intelligence, and respecting that people want to have their voices heard and they want to be understood is really a fantastic attribute for change leaders. The ability to listen well and to respond to others is crucial for developing your strong working relationships with your team members, with your executives, with your customers, and your network. And as you understand others, you're in a better position to problem solve and come up with change solutions that take their viewpoints and their needs into account. So another main way for developing long-lasting, nurturing relationships is through advocacy. And that's advocating not just for your team members, but also for your customers. A surefire relationship killer with your stakeholders is if you're only interested in the actual result. If you or your customers feel or believe that you're in it for yourself or you just want an outcome, a lot of times they'll check out and they won't engage deeply with you. And you may, not be successful. You could find yourself dead in the water, and it's just not something that you can fake. You're there for the change to be successful. You need to put your team and your customer at the forefront of the solution and have it be something that they are bought in with you. So how do you advocate for your team? I have come up with 3 techniques that I use quite a bit, and sometimes I even refer to them as magical methods. And the first one is to believe in your team before they believe in themselves. You've done this work. You are now the expert. You've got a lot of experience and judgment behind yourself, but they may not be there yet, and they may not be able to see the potential of the project. They may not see it in themselves, but when you see the potential in them and you talk about that, and then you help arrive at certain outcomes, this is where they're going to gain their own confidence and certainty in themselves. And in working in organizations, I see employees that work in their environment, and someone believing in them is sometimes what keeps them going from day to day. A lot of times people are really starved for this. A second magical method that I use for advocacy is don't grab the glory, I actually give it. So when there is good news to share with the audience or the team members, a lot of times I'll let a team member share that good news instead of me as the leader who makes an announcement. So I personally have found that watching other people deliver good news to their team members, it's a really joyful feeling, and it really feels good to see the team bonding in that such a way. So it's more fun actually to let somebody else have the glory instead of you communicating it. And then the third thing that I do for advocacy is to learn how to say no for the win. And this one is really hard. It takes practice, and it's an advanced skill, but it really does work. It's a critical technique that you can experiment with. Saying yes is easy. That's really not what leadership is about, but saying no and establishing the constraints and limits for your team will drive up their creativity and their productivity. And you'll be amazed at what they can do. But they're not going to be in agreement so much with those limits that you set on them. So you have to be willing to hold the line. And if you're able to do that and encourage the team with aggressive limits, well, maybe not aggressive, but with reasonable limits and strong deadlines, you're going to find that their creativity and productivity is going to go up. And the special thing that happens is then their own confidence and their beliefs in themselves also goes up. What about for your customer? How do you advocate for your customer? So I look at 3 things: to be open-minded, to be service-minded, and make sure that your customer knows that you care about them. And once you have a thorough understanding of your customer's needs, you can link your change efforts, benefits back to those needs. And a really key thing to remember is that customers do not always articulate their needs, especially in the midst of change. A lot of times people will just communicate what they already know, those existing ways of being, of working, of doing, those existing habits. And so a key mantra that I share with my team members is don't give your customers what they're asking for, give them what they need. And you, as the change agent and as the leader of your team, needs to challenge your team members to do that. So you want to challenge the status quo. You don't want to give them only what they want. You want to solve problems that are going to meet their needs, which is going to allow them to be happier in the long run. And I will tell you, it's really, really worth that upfront cost to spare you the long-term heartache of giving them what they ask for, but it's not going to make them happy. So the last competency is communicating to inspire. Sharing your enthusiasm is one of the most important things you can do as a change leader. You already see the future. You're excited about it, and you know it's possible. And for me, this is most powerful when you're challenged by a nervous executive. Is it really possible? And you look at them sincerely and say, yes, it is. I have done it. When you can communicate your enthusiasm, you're providing certainty to an area of uncertainty. And in being certain of your own abilities, and you're being resourceful and creative and relentless in finding answers and solutions, this will help your team and your customers believe in yourselves, and your change projects will be super successful. So in techniques or practical methods that I use that allows me to communicate really well and to get people inspired to participate is the technique of yes and. And if you've ever taken an improv class, this is the first rule that they teach you. And from my own experience, it takes practice to master this, but it's an amazing way to expand your own creativity and the energy and creativity of a group. And sometimes I'll even listen to the group and write down yes and later, after I have time to reflect, I try to bring it up, and that one can be, really, really fun to pick up on something and then saying yes and, after the group departs and you're bringing it back, showing them that you're listening and improvising at the same time. And, I took an improv class once, and it was really, really super fun, and it's a great exercise. It's even something to consider for your own group to consider, as they can then learn to communicate better within each other, within the group. And then secondly, a technique that I use is to learn to direct and learn to predict. And sometimes I say I learned to call the shot. And what this does is it creates a gap in their knowledge and helps your team members to develop curiosity. And in the game of billiards, you must call your shot. You say, before you hit your ball, you say, I'm going to put the 9 ball in the corner pocket. So that's what I'm talking about is, as a change agent, you're constantly focused on the future. And so you want to direct your team members where to go, but then let them come up with the how, let them come up with the details. And so I call it for them by putting it on the calendar and say, in January, we will have 80% of this completed, or we'll have 5 new customers, we'll have 10 new sales. And so by putting those goals, by calling those shots, you're creating momentum and communication that inspires your team members into action. And as you gain experience as a change leader, you're going to learn the common questions that people ask. You're going to be able to predict people's reactions, predict their own behaviors, but you're certainly going to get the same types of questions over and over and over. And a really effective communication technique that inspires people is for you to mind read out loud, and in your presentations, in your status reports, in your department meetings, is to just up front have it be part of the agenda. What are the questions are on people's minds? What does the rumor mill say? And address them openly, transparently, without somebody having to ask. That goes a long, long way to building credibility and trust with your team members, because they know that they don't have to be the one who sacrifices, by asking about a sacred cow or something that people are afraid to ask about. If you, as the leader, can address it proactively and with great transparency. And saying this also helps people to get to level 4. You can say, I know that many of you are concerned about this and we've had this experience. So here's what I'm going to do, and here's how we're going to work on this together, and here's how we're going to prevent it going forward. That also helps lift your team members up to level 4 by doing that in a group setting. So those are the 3 specific techniques I utilize for communication that inspires. And that is the last core competency that I've walked through with these 2 sessions on leadership competencies for change leaders. And the next section is what we started last time with the leadership alchemy, and a real challenge for you to start building your own change leader development plan. Many of these videos right now are just purely, one way, one direction, but hopefully someday we can have interactive sessions or do Zoom calls if you've got interested common questions. And I put a change leader assessment on my website. You can download it for free and take a look at both these competencies that we talked about here, as well as all of the leadership alchemy, curiosity, imagination, perseverance, grit, all of those, and assess where you are and then where do you want to go. So change leaders are first-rate navigators. You're the guide, you're the director, you're the person to lead your team. But in order for you to lead your team, you've got to master these skills and inspire greatness in yourself. And leaders who get really creative and resourceful will figure out how to get their team to that next step. And when you are exemplifying those key characteristics, you're going to find you've got some pretty ardent followers and some pretty dedicated fans to you as the leader. So in addition, change agents are also accurate fortune tellers. They know what's happening and they know how it's going to feel. So they explain and they normalize change for people. And it becomes less scary, and they demonstrate compassion and they're supportive. And when you can anticipate the future and create it, it's much, much easier to do than reacting from a position of loss, or even worse, a position from chaos. So the first step in believing in others is to believe in yourself. And by doing that, by taking responsibility for your own change development plan, leadership development plan, you're going to identify the characteristics that you want to strengthen and want to improve. So most importantly, you will get results. And if you make decisions to improve your own leadership skills, you will turn out to be a really great change leader. So I hope that the Leadership Competencies series was helpful and provided you with some good practical ways to expand and grow your leadership. I really challenge you to invest in yourself. I believe you and you alone are the best investment you can make. Better than real estate, better than Wall Street. And the return that you get on your leadership education, your own experiments, your own growth, they will be the highest returns that you will earn. Not just financially, but with a rich, meaningful life in all areas. So work on your development plan. Where are you today? Where do you want to be? What are those characteristics that you want to improve? And sure, you can't pick all at once. So work on one for 3-4 months, work on the next one the following 6 months. What excites you? What do you want to achieve with developing a certain skill? And it's a reminder you can't put it on autopilot. It just won't happen. You have to choose to be great. And I know you can do this. And so I'll believe in you until you can believe into yourself, because soon you will be going from that's impossible to what's next.